I never imagined I'd be standing here, in front of this extravagant high-rise, its glass windows gleaming under the golden city lights. The entrance was adorned with towering floral arrangements, and the guests stepping out of luxury vehicles were dressed in their finest. Women in shimmering gowns, men in tailored tuxedos, all laughing, mingling, living in a world of status and power. And here I was, invited to a wedding I had no business attending. Claudia's wedding. My ex-wife. For years, I had pushed her out of my mind, letting time and distance erase the bitter ending we had shared. I had moved on, or at least that's what I had convinced myself. But then, the invitation arrived, handwritten, elegant, deliberate. The moment I saw the familiar curve of her script, I felt something stir deep inside me. "I hope you'll attend." That was all she had written. No explanation, no unnecessary pleasantries. Just those 4 words, weighted with meaning. I should have ignored it. But curiosity has a way of dragging a man into places he knows he shouldn't go. So, I came. Stepping inside the grand ballroom was like walking into another lifetime. The chandeliers hung like cascading crystals, illuminating the marble floors beneath my feet. Waiters glided through the room carrying glasses of champagne, and a live orchestra played a soft melody that melted into the air like silk. It was a world Claudia had always wanted. A world she had built for herself, far removed from the life we once shared. I kept to the shadows, unnoticed. At least, until I saw him. Richard, the man who had taken my place. I knew of him. How could I not? A finance mogul, one of the elite. A man whose face graced business magazines alongside my ex-wife's. He stood at the center of the crowd, basking in admiration, his arm possessively wrapped around Claudia's waist. And then his eyes locked onto me. For a moment, I thought he might ignore me, pretend I didn't exist, as if I were nothing more than a ghost from Claudia's past. But instead, he smirked, that condescending kind of smile men like him reserved for people they believed were beneath them. He leaned in close, his voice a quiet sneer. "You're a middle school dropout, right?" I stilled. "Why don't you do yourself a favor and cut ties with my wife?" The audacity. I slowly turned my gaze to meet his, studying the arrogance in his expression, the way his lips curled with satisfaction as if he expected me to shrink under his words. He had no idea who he was speaking to. I could have reacted, could have let my pride force me into a confrontation. But instead, I merely smiled, a knowing, amused kind of smile. Because if Richard thought I was a mere dropout, a forgotten footnote in Claudia's story, then he was in for a surprise he'd never see coming. There was a time when Claudia and I were inseparable. We weren't always these people. Her, the untouchable CEO of a major bank, and me, the man she had long left behind. There was a time when she looked at me the way a person looks at their world, with love, admiration, and a belief that together we could conquer anything. We met as teenagers, 2 people from vastly different backgrounds. Claudia had always been driven, her mind wired for ambition, for control, for calculated steps that would take her where she wanted to go. I, on the other hand, never cared for rules, for institutions, for paths that had been carved out by others. My heart belonged to music, to the piano, to the melodies that spoke louder than words ever could. Back then, she loved that about me. She would sit beside me on the piano bench, watching as my fingers danced across the keys, her head resting on my shoulder as I composed songs just for her. She told me my music made her feel alive, that it was the one thing in her structured world that felt unpredictable, real. "You don't have to follow their rules," I had told her once. "You can just live." She had smiled, a rare, soft smile that she only ever showed when it was just the 2 of us. "I want the best for us." At the time, I believed her. But as the years passed, her love for my music turned into something else, something resentful, something disapproving. "You can't just live on music alone," she would say, frustration creeping into her voice. "What kind of life is that?" To her, stability was everything. A future needed to be built, not left to chance. And in her mind, my refusal to conform, to chase promotions and degrees, meant that I had no future at all. At first, the changes were subtle, Little comments here and there, gentle nudges to think about my future, to consider something more stable. But soon, it became a divide too wide to ignore. I remember the night it all came to a head. We were in our small apartment, the one we had moved into after college, the one where I had spent nights composing while she buried herself in business textbooks. She had come home late, her expression unreadable, her posture tense. "We need to talk," she had said. I already knew what was coming. "This isn't working." I had simply nodded. There was no yelling, no pleading, no desperate attempts to make her stay. I could see it in her eyes. She had already decided. She left, and I let her go. And so Claudia climbed the corporate ladder, and I disappeared into my music, traveling from city to city, performing in jazz bars, on street corners, in grand halls. She built her empire, and I built mine. But the difference was, mine didn't need validation. Years passed. She became powerful, influential, a name that commanded respect. And I became something she never saw coming. And now, here we were. Her wedding. Her perfect world. And yet, for some reason, she had invited me. I looked around the ballroom, at the crystal chandeliers, at the towering floral centerpieces, at the people dressed in wealth and status. This was her world now. "Why did you even come?" I turned at the sound of the voice and found Marcus, Claudia's younger brother, standing beside me. Unlike his sister, Marcus had never judged me. If anything, he had admired my music, often sneaking into my performances just to listen. "Curiosity, I suppose," I replied with a smirk. Marcus exhaled, shaking his head. "Richard's an idiot. He doesn't know who you are, does he?" "No," I said simply. Marcus gave a half-laugh. "You could ruin him in a second, and he doesn't even know it." I shrugged. "That's the fun part." Just then, Richard's voice rang out again, louder this time, directed at me. "Why is someone like you even here? This event is for people of status." I turned my head slowly, meeting his gaze. He was enjoying this moment of superiority, this belief that he had won something, that I was nothing. I could have responded, could have humbled him with a few well-placed words. But instead, I simply chuckled, because this man had no idea who he had just insulted, and soon he would learn. The reception hall was grand, designed for people who lived their lives in the upper echelons of society. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, refracting golden light across tables set with silk napkins and polished silverware. A string quartet played in the background, the kind of elegant, restrained music that fit perfectly with Claudia's world. I took a sip of my drink, not particularly interested in the fine whiskey they were serving. Around me, conversations buzzed about stock markets, high-profile mergers, and political influence. This wasn't my world, and I had no desire to belong to it. Yet, despite that, I was here. I should have left the moment Richard threw his little insult my way. I had nothing to prove, nothing to gain from staying. But something about this moment, about standing in a room full of people who thought they knew everything, kept me rooted in place. And then, I saw him. Marcus. Unlike Claudia, Marcus had never let social status dictate his relationships. He had always been more open-minded, more genuine. He was a man who, despite his success as an investment analyst, still valued the simple things. We had met years ago, back when Claudia and I were still together. He was younger, still finding his way, and for some reason, he had gravitated toward me, intrigued by the way I lived. Where Claudia had seen irresponsibility, Marcus had seen freedom. He would sneak into my performances, absorbing the music as if it spoke to him in ways numbers and financial reports never could. And now, here he was, standing in front of me, shaking his head with a wry smile. "I told Claudia she shouldn't have invited you if Richard was going to act like that," he said, his voice low so only I could hear. "Let them have their moment," I replied, unaffected. "This is their night, after all." Marcus snorted. "That's generous of you. He doesn't deserve it, though. You know that, right?" I knew, but it wasn't my problem. Richard, however, was still enjoying his little power trip. "Why is someone like you even here?" he called out again, his voice deliberately loud enough for people nearby to hear. "This event is for people of status." I turned my head slightly, meeting his gaze. Around him, guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing the hostility in his words. But Richard didn't care. He was too drunk on his own arrogance to notice. I chuckled, a quiet, amused sound that made his brow furrow. "What's funny?" he demanded, taking a step closer. "Nothing," I replied smoothly. "I just find it interesting how people assume status is defined by the clothes you wear, the title on your business card, or the weight of your bank account." Richard scoffed. "That's because it is. And you? You're just some nobody my wife made the mistake of inviting." His words were designed to sting, to put me in my place. But I didn't react the way he wanted. Instead, I just smiled. Because in that moment, I realized something. Richard had no idea who I was. And neither did Claudia. I had spent years building a life outside of their world, away from corporate skyscrapers and high society gatherings. I had poured my soul into my music, traveled the world, performed in places they would never step foot in. I had built something for myself, something real, something lasting. And yet, in their eyes, I was still the same man Claudia had walked away from all those years ago. That was the real joke. Marcus, standing beside me, smirked as if he could read my thoughts. "You really don't know who he is, do you?" he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Richard to hear. Richard frowned, his bravado faltering for the first time. "What the hell are you talking about?" I could have told him. I could have let him in on the truth right then and there. But where was the fun in that? Instead, I just took another sip of my drink and turned away, letting Richard stew in his own ignorance. Because soon enough, he was going to find out exactly who I was. And when that moment came, it would be his world that shattered. I wasn't always the man standing in this lavish ballroom, exchanging smug glances with men like Richard. There was a time when my name meant nothing, when my pockets were empty, and when Claudia looked at me as if I were a burden rather than a partner. I had grown up in a world where money was plentiful, where my father's name carried weight in boardrooms and business circles. But that world collapsed overnight. One bad investment, one wrong decision, and everything was gone. The grand estate we once lived in, sold to pay off debts. The expensive cars, repossessed before we could even adjust to the reality of being broke. My father was never the same after that. I remember the morning I woke up to find him sitting in the kitchen, staring at nothing, a cup of untouched coffee in his trembling hands. He had built an empire and lost it all, and in his eyes, I saw a man who had no idea how to live outside of wealth. But I was different. I wasn't tied to the stock market, to the endless pursuit of status, to the belief that life's value was measured in dollars. What I had, what no financial collapse could ever take away, was my music. Even after we moved into a tiny apartment, stripped of every luxury, I didn't care. I had my old keyboard, a set of worn-out headphones, and an imagination that never stopped creating melodies. That was when I met Marcus. I had been playing in the school music room, my fingers gliding over the keys, lost in a song I hadn't even realized I was composing. The door creaked open, and I glanced up to see a younger boy standing in the doorway, eyes wide with awe. "That was incredible," he had said. We became friends almost instantly. Marcus had always admired my music. He would sneak into rehearsals, watching me play, asking endless questions about how I composed, how I turned emotions into sound. He was still a teenager, but even then, he had the sharp mind of a businessman. "You could make money from this," he told me once. Real money. I laughed at the idea. Back then, I wasn't thinking about fame or fortune. I just wanted to play. Then Claudia entered my life. She was everything I wasn't. Structured, disciplined, always chasing the next goal. At first, she admired my free spirit. She would sit beside me while I played, listening with a dreamy look in her eyes. But admiration slowly turned into frustration. "You need a plan," she would say. "You can't just play music forever and hope life works out." She wanted me to be something I wasn't. I didn't argue. I didn't try to change her mind. I just let her go. While she climbed the corporate ladder, I packed my bags and traveled. I played in jazz clubs, on street corners, in underground bars where people weren't looking for the next big thing. They just wanted to feel something real. And that was what my music did. It reached people. It spoke to them in ways words never could. I never cared about money, but money came anyway. I built a name for myself, not in boardrooms or skyscrapers, but in concert halls, in viral videos that racked up millions of views. My fan base spanned the globe, yet I never flaunted my success. And now, I was standing in Claudia's world once again, watching as her new husband sneered at me, completely oblivious to the fact that the middle school dropout he was mocking could buy and sell his entire empire 10 times over. Richard didn't know, but Marcus did. He stood beside me, his expression unreadable as he watched Richard dig himself deeper into his own arrogance. "You really don't know who he is, do you?" Marcus finally said, his voice calm, but laced with amusement. Richard turned to him with a frown. "What the hell are you talking about?" I let out a quiet chuckle, shaking my head. "Nothing," I said, taking another sip of my drink. "Enjoy your night." And with that, I turned away, leaving Richard stewing in his own ignorance. Because soon enough, he was going to find out exactly who I was. And when that moment came, the look on his face would be worth every second of this ridiculous night. The wedding ceremony had ended, and now the reception was in full swing. Guests clinked their champagne glasses, murmuring about business deals and luxury vacations while the orchestra played an elegant tune in the background. The waitstaff moved seamlessly between the tables, refilling drinks, offering delicately plated hors d'oeuvres, and ensuring that every guest's experience was nothing short of perfection. I had remained on the sidelines for most of the night, an outsider in a world I had deliberately left behind. But Claudia, always so careful about appearances, made her way toward me at last. She looked exactly as I remembered her, elegant, poised, the very definition of success. The gown she wore was an extension of that image, fitted to perfection, expensive enough to make a statement without seeming excessive. She stopped in front of me, hesitation flickering in her eyes. "You came," she said softly, as if she hadn't expected me to. I did. For a moment, she seemed unsure of what to say. Maybe she was wondering why I accepted the invitation in the first place. Maybe she wanted to know what I had been doing all these years. Or maybe she was simply realizing that I wasn't the same man she had left behind. Before she could say another word, he stepped in. Richard, the man who had spent the entire evening trying to belittle me, as if doing so would cement his own superiority. His arm wrapped around Claudia's waist, his grip firm, possessive. "Listen, drop out," he scoffed, his voice laced with arrogance. "My wife doesn't need someone like you lingering around. Cut ties and move on." It was almost comical, the way he stood there, so assured of his dominance, so convinced that I was nothing more than a footnote in Claudia's past. I let out a breath, shaking my head slightly. "All right," I said, pulling my phone out of my pocket. "I'll start by closing my $700 million account at your bank." The moment the words left my mouth, the air in the ballroom seemed to shift. Everything, every conversation, every clink of a champagne glass, every note from the orchestra, seemed to pause all at once. The people around us turned their heads, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. But the best reaction came from Richard himself. His smirk faltered. His confidence wavered. "What?" he stammered, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. I glanced at Claudia, who had gone pale, her grip tightening around the stem of the champagne glass in her hand. "You heard me," I said casually, tilting my head. "I'm withdrawing my $700 million. Your wife is the CEO. She can handle it, right?" Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room but chokes it. Marcus, who had been quietly watching from the sidelines, let out a low whistle, shaking his head in amusement. "Damn," he muttered under his breath. I turned my gaze back to Richard, who was struggling to process what had just happened. His hands twitched at his sides, his jaw tightening, his entire demeanor shifting from arrogance to outright panic. "You're lying," he finally said, but there was no conviction behind his words. Claudia, however, wasn't as quick to dismiss me. She reached out, grabbing my wrist, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're joking, right?" There was something in her eyes, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Fear. Not the fear of losing me. The fear of losing what I represented. I shrugged. slipping my phone back into my pocket. Why would I joke? I said lightly. Your husband wanted me gone. I'm just making it easier. The color drained from Richard's face. He turned sharply to Claudia, his voice breaking as he demanded, This is a joke, right? This guy doesn't have that kind of money. But before Claudia could respond, Marcus, who had been enjoying the scene far too much, let out a chuckle, shaking his head. You really don't know who he is, do you? Richard's eyes darted between Marcus and Claudia, his panic growing by the second. I could see it, the realization creeping in, the weight of his mistake settling heavily on his shoulders. And for the first time that night, he wasn't the one in control. I turned to leave, fully prepared to walk away and let them deal with the aftermath of their own arrogance. But just as I took a step forward, Richard grabbed my arm. Wait. I pulled my arm free, meeting his desperate gaze with an impassive stare. You made your point, he said, his voice unsteady. You're obviously successful. There's no need to. I cut him off with a simple tilt of my head. No need to what? I asked. Show you what happens when you underestimate people? Richard swallowed hard. I could see the desperation in his eyes, the frantic way his mind was scrambling for a way to salvage the situation. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough so that only he could hear. Next time, I murmured, be careful who you look down on. And with that, I turned away, leaving him standing there, speechless, humiliated, and fully aware that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The night was far from over, but one thing was certain. I had already won. The weight of my words hung heavy in the air, thickening the atmosphere of the once lavish celebration. The clinking of glasses had stopped, the hum of casual conversation replaced with stunned silence. Eyes darted toward Claudia, toward Richard, toward me. The dropout, the nobody, the man who was supposed to be insignificant. Except now, I wasn't. Now, I was the only person in this room who mattered. Claudia's grip on my wrist tightened, her fingers cold against my skin. I could see the panic blooming in her eyes, the careful facade of composure she had perfected over the years cracking at the edges. You're joking, right? She whispered again, her voice softer now, almost pleading. I tilted my head slightly, studying her. Claudia had always been meticulous, always in control. Every move she made was calculated, deliberate. But this was the first time I had ever seen her rattled. I let out a quiet chuckle. Why would I joke? I said smoothly, slipping my wrist free from her grasp. Your husband wanted me gone. I'm just making it easier. Richard finally snapped out of his stunned silence, shaking his head as if trying to shake off reality itself. His hands curled into fists at his sides, and for a moment, I almost thought he might try something stupid. This is ridiculous, he muttered under his breath before turning sharply to Claudia. Tell me this isn't real. Tell me he doesn't have that kind of money. But Claudia couldn't say anything, because she already knew the truth. She had always assumed she knew who I was. That when she left me behind, she had moved on to something better. And yet, here she was, realizing that I had become something far beyond what she could have imagined. Marcus, who had been watching the entire exchange with barely concealed amusement, finally let out a chuckle, shaking his head. You really don't know who he is, do you? He said, looking at Richard like he was the biggest idiot in the room. Richard turned to him, his face a mask of frustration. What the hell are you talking about? Marcus smirked. You should probably Google him. That was all it took. Within seconds, whispers rippled through the room, fingers tapping on phone screens as people looked me up. And then, just like that, the shift happened. I could feel it. The weight of 100 pairs of eyes flickering between me and the glowing screens in their hands. The slow realization washing over them. The collective gasp that followed. Someone near the back of the room exhaled a sharp breath. No way. Another voice, barely above a whisper. Wait, he's... Richard snatched Claudia's phone from her hands, his eyes scanning the screen, his expression twisting into something between shock and dread. And then, finally, the moment I had been waiting for. His hands shook, his confidence, so unwavering, so absolute, shattered. I watched as reality sank in, as he pieced together every mistake he had made tonight. Because now, he knew. I wasn't just some washed-up nobody from Claudia's past. I wasn't a dropout. I wasn't a failure. I was one of the most renowned pianists in the world. A musician with an audience of millions. A net worth that far surpassed his own. And the worst part? I had never needed to flaunt it. Richard's jaw clenched so tight, I thought he might break his teeth. He turned back to Claudia, his face ashen. "Did you know?" he demanded. Claudia didn't answer. Because she didn't have one. She had left me behind all those years ago, certain that I would amount to nothing. She had assumed that, without her, I would fade into obscurity. And now, at her own wedding, in front of everyone she respected, she was being forced to face the truth. Richard took a shaky breath, his mind undoubtedly scrambling for a way to fix this. "Look," he started, his voice low, measured. "There's no need to be rash. Let's just—" I raised a brow. "Rash?" He swallowed. "I'm just saying maybe we should talk. You don't actually have to close your account. I mean, let's be reasonable here." I studied him for a long moment. A part of me considered dragging this out, watching him squirm a little longer. But then I decided I was already bored. I turned my attention back to Claudia. "It's funny," I mused, "how things work out, isn't it?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. Because she knew that, no matter how much power or status she had built for herself, no matter how far ahead she had thought she had lost. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I had plotted some elaborate scheme to humiliate her, but because life had a way of evening things out. And tonight, fate had decided to settle the score. I turned away from them, stepping toward the exit, but Richard called after me one last time. "Wait, you're not actually closing your account, are you?" I smirked, not bothering to look back. "I'll think about it." And with that, I walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind a wedding that would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. I stepped out of the ballroom, but the echoes of the stunned silence behind me followed like an unspoken chorus. The night air was crisp against my skin as I moved toward the grand staircase leading down to the courtyard. My every step measured, deliberate. This wasn't how I had imagined the night going. Then again, I hadn't expected much when I first opened Claudia's invitation. I had assumed she sent it out of obligation, or maybe to prove something to herself, that she had moved on, that she had one. But now, I wasn't so sure, because the way she had looked at me back there, that wasn't the look of a woman who felt victorious. That was the look of a woman who had realized too late that she had miscalculated everything. The breeze carried the muffled hum of voices from inside, the party still continuing despite the tension that had fractured the perfect illusion. I could only imagine the whispers spreading now, the quiet conversations picking apart the moment they had all witnessed firsthand. I had spent years living outside of their world, and yet, in the span of one evening, I had somehow managed to redefine my presence within it. I reached the bottom of the steps, planning to call for a car when I heard hurried footsteps behind me. "Wait," I sighed before I even turned around. I already knew who it was. Claudia. She stood at the top of the stairs, her silhouette framed against the golden lights of the ballroom entrance. The way she held herself was the same as always, poised, elegant, still in control even when everything around her was falling apart. Except now, I could see the cracks. For the first time since I had arrived, she wasn't performing for an audience. She wasn't the unshakable CEO, the woman who had orchestrated this perfect evening. Right now, she was just Claudia, the same woman I had once shared late-night conversations with, the same woman who had once curled up beside me as I played the piano, letting my music lull her to sleep, the same woman who had walked away. I didn't move as she descended the stairs, her steps slower now, more hesitant. "We need to talk," she said, her voice quieter than before. "There's nothing left to say," I replied evenly. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe I was actually walking away from this. "I was wrong about you," she admitted, and I caught the slight tremor in her voice. "About everything." I let out a humorless chuckle, glancing up at the sky. The city lights flickered in the distance, the skyline an endless sprawl of glass and steel. Everything she had built her life around. "What part?" I asked, finally looking at her. The part where you assumed I'd never be anything? Or the part where you thought I'd always be there, waiting for you to realize your mistake? She flinched. Good. Because the truth had always been simple. She had never believed in me. Not really. She had loved me, once. But even back then, that love had always been conditional, hinged on the idea that one day I would change, that I would wake up and suddenly decide to chase the kind of success she valued. And when I didn't, she left. I didn't know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. That's the problem, isn't it? I said, tilting my head. You never asked. You never cared to know. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her fingers curling into the fabric of her wedding dress. You have no idea how many times I thought about calling you, she finally admitted. About asking if what? I interrupted. If I had changed? If I had finally become the person you wanted me to be? She swallowed hard. I took a step closer, my voice calm but firm. Claudia, you didn't leave me because I had no ambition. You left me because I refused to chase the kind of ambition you respected. Her breath hitched. And that's okay, I continued. You made your choice and I made mine. The difference is, I never regretted mine. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. She had spent years convincing herself that she had moved on, that her life was better without me, that she had everything she ever wanted. But now, on her wedding night, she was standing in front of me, struggling to find the words to justify her choices. She started, then sighed. I just wanted to know if you were happy. I smiled then, small, knowing. I was happy the moment I stopped needing your approval. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to respond, but nothing came out. There it was, the truth she had never considered, the realization that I had never been waiting for her to realize her mistake, that I had never needed closure, because I had already moved past it long before she had. And that was the real loss. Not that she had left me, but that when she looked at me now, she knew, deep in her bones, that she had let go of something she could never get back. I took one last glance at her before turning away for the final time. Richard would still be inside, trying to salvage his bruised ego, clinging to whatever dignity he had left. The guests would still be whispering about the scene they had just witnessed. And Claudia? Claudia would go back inside that ballroom, smile for the cameras, and play her part as the perfect bride. But tonight, long after the music faded and the guests left, she would lie awake knowing that she had built her perfect life, her perfect empire. And yet, somehow, she had still lost. I walked toward the waiting car, sliding into the back seat as the driver closed the door behind me. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through messages from people who actually mattered. Musicians, old friends, people who had never doubted me. And then, almost on impulse, I opened my music app. I hit record, and in the quiet of the car, as the city blurred past the window, I started playing the melody that had once been Claudia's favorite, for old friends and lessons learned. Because some memories don't need words. Some lessons don't need to be spoken. And some victories are won in silence. The city lights flickered past in a blur of gold and white as the car cruised through the quiet streets. The weight of the night should have settled by now, but I could still feel the tension lingering in my chest like an unfinished chord. I leaned back against the seat, fingers grazing over the screen of my phone as I scrolled through unread messages. My inbox was full. Congratulatory texts from old friends, amused comments from people who had witnessed the spectacle at the wedding, and even a few industry executives reaching out with offers I had no intention of entertaining. It was strange, the way the past had suddenly resurfaced in one night. I hadn't come to Claudia's wedding expecting a confrontation. I hadn't even come with the intention of proving anything. But life had a funny way of tying up loose ends in its own brutal, poetic fashion. And Claudia? She had received her lesson in respect the hard way. The thought brought a small smirk to my lips, but it quickly faded as my thumb hovered over an old contact in my phone. I stared at the name for a long moment before finally closing the screen. There was no point in looking back now. A soft chime interrupted my thoughts, and I glanced at my screen. Marcus, where the hell did you disappear to? You left before the real fun started. I chuckled, shaking my head before typing a quick response. Me. I figured the entertainment portion of the night was already handled. His reply came almost instantly. Marcus, you should have stayed a little longer. Richard nearly lost his mind after you left. It was the most satisfying thing I've ever seen. I could picture it perfectly. Richard, trying to salvage what little dignity he had left, frantically whispering to Claudia, demanding an explanation, realizing too late that he had just burned a bridge he should have never crossed. I could also imagine the whispers that would haunt them for weeks, if not months. The ex-husband was actually a millionaire? How did they not know? Claudia really downgraded. Huh? And the best part? I didn't even have to lift a finger to orchestrate any of it. I tucked my phone away and glanced out the window. The streets had emptied, the city settling into its quiet late-night rhythm. The car slowed as it approached my building, an understated yet elegant brownstone tucked away from the chaos of the downtown district. Unlike Claudia, I had never needed grand displays of wealth to prove anything. "We're here, sir," the driver said, stepping out to open the door for me. I gave him a nod before stepping onto the pavement, adjusting the cuff of my jacket as I inhaled the crisp night air. As I reached the door, a familiar voice called out from behind. "Leaving without a goodbye? That's cold, man." I turned to see Marcus leaning against his own car, a knowing grin on his face. "You didn't have to chase me down just to say that," I quipped, unlocking my front door. Marcus shoved his hands in his pockets, following me inside like he owned the place. What can I say? I had to see the aftermath for myself. "You made quite an exit back there." I shook my head, tossing my keys onto the table as we entered the living room. The space was simple, warm lighting, dark wood floors, an antique grand piano sitting in the corner. It was a far cry from the cold luxury Claudia had surrounded herself with. Marcus walked over to the piano, running his fingers along the polished surface before whistling. "You know, I always wondered where you ended up," he mused. "Turns out, you ended up on top. Quietly, of course, but still." I shrugged, pulling off my jacket. I never needed an audience. "Could have fooled me," Marcus chuckled. "The way you played them all tonight? That was a damn performance." I smirked, shaking my head. "That wasn't a performance," I corrected. "That was just reality hitting them a little harder than they expected." Marcus laughed, sinking into the couch. "You have no idea how much I've wanted to see Richard taken down a peg. He's been unbearable since day one. The moment Claudia started dating him, it was like he thought he owned the world. That explains why he acted like a complete idiot tonight," I muttered. Marcus nodded. "He's always been insecure. That's why he flaunts his money, why he always has to prove he's the most important person in the room. But you? You walked in without saying a damn word, and suddenly, he was the fool. That's power, my friend." I leaned against the armrest, my fingers absently tapping against my knee. "I didn't do it for power," I said. "I just wanted to remind them that some people don't need validation to be successful." Marcus exhaled, shaking his head with a grin. "And that's exactly why you won tonight." I fell silent, my gaze drifting toward the piano. "You know," Marcus said, leaning back, "Claudia didn't look too happy after you left." I raised a brow. "She's married now. Her happiness isn't my problem." "Maybe not," he admitted. "But let's be real. Tonight wasn't just a wedding for her. It was a statement. She wanted to show you that she had one. But instead, she got the exact opposite." I considered that for a moment, the thought settling into my chest like a final note at the end of a melody. "Maybe," I murmured. Marcus studied me for a long moment before sighing. "Well, if you ever want to rub it in just a little more, I've got plenty of stories about Richard that'll make you laugh." I chuckled, shaking my head. "I think I've done enough damage for one night." Marcus stood, stretching. "Fair enough. But don't be a stranger, all right? Some of us actually enjoy your company." "Noted," I said, walking him to the door. As he stepped out into the night, he turned back with one last smirk. "By the way, that whole 'I'll think about it' line, pure gold. Richard's probably still sweating over it." I laughed, watching as he disappeared down the street. Closing the door behind me, I exhaled deeply. The night had been unexpected, chaotic, a reminder of how far I had come. And yet, I felt lighter. Because now, there were no more ghosts from my past waiting in the shadows. No more unfinished stories. Just me, my music, and the life I had built on my own terms. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. There was no lingering weight in my chest, no unresolved emotions clawing at the edges of my mind. The past was exactly where it needed to be, behind me. The sunlight streamed through the curtains of my loft, warming the hardwood floors and casting long, golden streaks across the grand piano in the corner. The instrument had been with me through everything, from the days when I had nothing but a worn-out keyboard to now, when I had built a life far greater than what anyone had expected. As I stretched and pulled myself out of bed, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Marcus. I smirked, shaking my head. Of course, he wouldn't let last night die down just yet. I picked up the call and leaned against the window, watching the city come to life below me. "Please tell me you saw the news," Marcus said, his voice full of barely contained amusement. I raised an eyebrow. "Should I be concerned?" "Depends," he said. "Are you concerned about the fact that the entire wedding is trending?" I blinked. "Trending? What the hell are you talking about?" Marcus laughed. "Just check social media. Oh, and before you do, don't say I didn't warn you." I ended the call and immediately pulled up my phone, tapping into one of the news apps I rarely bothered with. And there it was. CEO's wedding becomes a night to remember, for all the wrong reasons. I scrolled further. My curiosity piqued. There were hundreds of posts, all dissecting what had happened last night, from Richard's arrogance to the moment he realized he had insulted the wrong man. One video had already gone viral, a recording of the exact moment I had said, "I'll start by closing my $700 million account at your bank." The caption? "The art of a silent flex." I exhaled, shaking my head in disbelief. I had never sought attention for what I did. I had spent years avoiding the very world that now seemed fascinated with me. And yet, here it was. The internet had caught on, and people were loving the irony. I scrolled further and found comments that ranged from brutal to outright hilarious. "Imagine marrying a man who doesn't even know his wife's ex could buy his company 3 times over. LMAO. Richard, why are you even here?" Him. "Just checking if my money's still safe in your wife's bank." Claudia's face when she realized she fumbled the bag, priceless. I shook my head, placing the phone on the counter. It was strange. For years, Claudia and I had lived completely separate lives, with no overlap, until last night. Now, our names were being spoken together again, but not in the way she had hoped. And I just knew, that she would hate every second of it. The thought made me chuckle as I made my way to the kitchen, brewing a fresh cup of coffee. But just as I took my first sip, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Marcus. It was Claudia. I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether I should even bother answering. I had nothing left to say to her. I had walked away last night for a reason. And yet, something about the fact that she was calling me now, after everything, made me curious. I sighed before finally answering. "Claudia." There was silence on the other end. Then, finally, a sigh. "I assume you've seen the news." I smirked. "Did you really think I wouldn't?" She let out a dry laugh, but there was no humor in it. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I leaned against the counter, tilting my head slightly. "And how exactly was it supposed to go?" She hesitated before responding. I didn't think it would turn into this. I didn't invite you to humiliate you." I scoffed. "No? Then why did Richard feel so comfortable trying to insult me in front of everyone?" She didn't answer right away. "He didn't know who you were," she admitted. I chuckled. That much was obvious. Another pause. "I thought you would have told me, you know." That caught me off guard. "Told you what?" "That you became this." I exhaled through my nose, shaking my head. "You never asked, Claudia." She sighed again. "I know." There it was. The regret. Not just for last night. For everything. For walking away. For assuming I would never be anything. For realizing too late that she had been wrong about me. But I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of an emotional reunion. I had nothing left for her. "I don't know what you expect me to say, Claudia," I said evenly. "But whatever it is, I'm not interested. She let out a slow breath. I figured. Silence stretched between us again, heavier this time. I knew this would be the last time we ever spoke, and somehow I was okay with that. I hope you're happy, she said at last, her voice softer now, almost vulnerable. I am, I answered simply, because for the first time in years, I truly meant it. Without another word, I ended the call, placing my phone face down on the counter. And just like that, it was over. No more unfinished business. No more what-ifs. Just me, my music, and the life I had built on my own terms. The past was finally where it belonged. And I was exactly where I needed to be. The silence after the call was different from any I had experienced before. It wasn't heavy or suffocating like unfinished business. It was clean, like the last note of a song played exactly as it was meant to be. I stood there in my kitchen, my coffee now cooling in my hand, realizing something simple but profound. It was over. Not in the way heartbreak lingers. Not in the way some people tell themselves they've moved on but secretly still check old photos in the middle of the night. No, this was truly over. There was nothing left to say, nothing left unresolved. Claudia and I had walked separate paths for years, and last night had been the final crossroads where our worlds collided before splitting apart forever. And somehow, I had been given the last word, not just in conversation, but in the way life had played out. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need Claudia to beg for me back, nor did I need Richard to suffer beyond the public humiliation he had already earned. All I needed was what I already had, a life that was mine and mine alone. With a quiet sigh, I placed my phone down and turned to the one thing that had always made sense: music. My fingers found the smooth keys of the grand piano, and without thinking, I began to play. The melody was soft, almost bittersweet. It wasn't for Claudia, it was for me. A quiet reminder that I had never needed her validation, that I had always been enough, just as I was, that I had never been the one who lost. Halfway through the song, a notification lit up my phone screen. I nearly ignored it, but something told me to look. Marcus had sent me a video. I sighed, shaking my head. Of course he had. I pressed play, and then I laughed. It was a recording from inside the wedding hall after I had left. The camera was shaky, likely taken by someone trying not to get caught, but the audio was crystal clear. Richard stood near the table, his face red with fury, his hands gesturing wildly as he spoke to Claudia. What the hell were you thinking, inviting him here? Claudia looked exhausted, her face blank, her fingers massaging her temple. Richard, please. No, don't please me, he snapped. Do you realize what you've done? Do you know how many people were watching? How many of them are laughing at us right now? She exhaled. It wasn't supposed to go like this. Well, it did. Richard practically shouted. And now you've made me look like an idiot. One of his business partners tried to step in, speaking calmly. Richard, maybe we should sit? No, he interrupted, shaking his head. This was supposed to be about us. About me. And instead, I just got humiliated in front of everyone. Marcus's voice appeared in the background, dripping with amusement. Oh, don't take it so personally, Richard. You're just mad because you found out the hard way that you're not the most important man in your wife's life tonight. The audible gasp in the background was pure gold. Richard lost it. You think this is funny? He roared, moving toward Marcus, only for someone to hold him back. That guy, he's nobody. Just because he's got money doesn't mean. You're right, Marcus interrupted smoothly. His money isn't the point. It's the fact that he didn't even have to try to bring you down. He just existed, and it was enough. Richard's face contorted with rage. The video cut off. I laughed so hard I nearly choked. It was perfect. Richard had spent the whole night trying to prove his superiority, only to realize too late that he had never even been in the competition. And Claudia? She had miscalculated everything. I sent a quick text back to Marcus. I hope you know that video made my whole morning. His reply came immediately. Marcus, figured you'd appreciate it. Oh, and in case you were wondering, Richard didn't even sleep at home last night. Guy stormed off in the middle of the night. Classy. Huh? I smirked. Couldn't have happened to a better guy. Marcus responded with a string of laughing emojis before adding, Marcus, so, what's next for you? Now that your villain origin story is complete? I chuckled. Me? Nothing changes. I keep playing music, keep living my life. That's all I ever needed. Marcus's reply came slower this time. Marcus, you really won, didn't you? I set my phone down, my fingers grazing over the piano keys again. Yeah, I did. Not because I had more money than Richard. Not because I had stolen the show at their wedding. But because I had never been trying to win in the first place. I had just been living. And that, more than anything, was the real victory. With one last deep breath, I placed my hands on the piano and began to play. The notes filled the room, rich and full, echoing through the quiet morning. No cameras, no audience, no expectations, just music, just me. And for the first time in a long time, that was more than enough.